Hello, YouTube. It's been a long time. So I thought I'd come on and do a video about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I brought my cup of tea with me. I'm not in my role playing area and I'm not doing anything particular at the moment. I just thought I'd give it a few minutes. I haven't done a video for ages, so it's long overdue. We're talking about Pathfinder 2.0. It's just been announced. I've talked about this offline to a few people and a few people in other events. There's some wonderful community stuff out there. It's been a long time since I've done a video for YouTube. So it's a real pleasure to be back actually and just chatting and generally spitballing. Um, I'm I'm intrigued to see what Paizo do for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I've looked at a few live play videos, and the impression I get from those so far is it seems to be a step backwards, a bit like 5th edition. And I don't mean that backwards in terms of that it's not good enough or fit for purpose. Far from it, actually. I think that's refreshing. So there's a positive side to this. Um, and I think, like somebody quite rightly said, it will spawn a lot of new activity, which is a really good thing. And I think it's going to do a lot of good in general to reinvigorate really old school movement, which isn't a bad thing. And again, I mean that with a lot of respect. I think it's a really positive thing. So I'm genuinely very excited to see where this goes, what happens, and you know what the community at large really make of it. I've heard people, there's been some really interesting debates about this in terms of, some people have said that, does it really matter what version you play and stuff like that? And of course it doesn't. But there are some repercussions. Of course there is, because you see one of the arguments that was used, which was very interesting actually by a chap called Ronnie Bradley, and I hope I've got his name right. I may have typical me would have forgotten it properly. He says, I still use Pendragon Fourth and Cthulhu and different systems, the the ones that the period that he bought them, and they work perfectly fine. And generally, actually, to be honest, when you're talking about Pendragon, Cthulhu, and things like that, yes, they would. You could use that version continuously but it's harder and harder to find groups that like that type of game. Where when we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, the true license, or even Paizo, there's a bigger audience for it, or there is potentially a bigger audience or an easy audience to find. Yes, you can go online and find players, but I don't think the experience online is as strong as that sat round the table. I never have. I think it's okay, and if you find a really good group, that's great. But it is much harder. So, the problem comes that really when we talk about systems and strong systems, and I think fifth edition will obviously have a massive fan base and it's grown very well, and I'm really delighted to see that because I think it definitely moved in a direction that is much more palatable for myself, much more enjoyable. Put the ownership back in the GM's hands, which I really like, and I do feel more in control of the game, and I don't have to worry about the mathematics, the stats, and stuff like that. I know it's early days still. I'm not some fifth edition aficionado, far from it, because it took a long time to finish off other campaigns before we've reached this point. But it is a real pleasure, an absolute real pleasure to be at this stage in terms of playing fifth edition finally and enjoying it as a GM and getting the feedback that I really love, and without the stresses that come with running a very crunchy game, which was Pathfinder, the original game. Now, listening to what Paizo had to say, and hello for those that are watching in, but by all means, throw in your comments, etc. I hope they pop up and I can respond to them pretty quickly, which would be really cool. Um, yeah, listening to what Paizo had to say, they said that the core book obviously was their first book, and therefore, by definition, it's 10 years old, and effectively, it's kind of now become quite old in that regard as far as an RPG, and they felt the time was right for a second edition of the game. And I think, for me, I think there's a partial truth, or not quite partial truth, but a real truth to what they're saying. But there's also a little hint of something a little bit more, which when you think about what they've said, I mean, I've just had my game store contact me this weekend, just gone, and said effectively, here's the beta test. This is how much it will cost. Obviously, you can get it free. I'm not. I know this is something that you don't have to buy it if you don't want to, and it is a very reasonable price. But it's 20 odd quid for rules that may or may not be particularly relevant a few months later. And then you buy the core book, and we'll call it £40 for argument's sake. So you've now invested 60 quid before you blink. It's quite an investment in something that you're not likely to use again. Now, whether it's an all singing, all dancing, wonderful book or not, I really, isn't the point. If it was released free and then you had the choice to get, a soft cover or something for it as a beta test, that's fine, or print it yourself. I could understand that for a small nominal cost. Okay, but you're singing it as all singing, all dancing, and this kind of spells two things to me, which is one, that they knew that they had been planning this for quite some time, although they've said it's a play test, and I'm sure that there are areas in the play test that they will um, leave open for some player interaction interpretation for the direction it eventually goes in, which is great. But I think a lot of it is already clearly defined. Now, some of the changes that I've seen in the play test, and some of the things that some of it's a mystery to me. So don't do not get me wrong. I have no real understanding at this stage about whether this new version, or the things that I've seen in these live play videos, is if I've seen it accurately enough to recall it with great clarity. I haven't written any notes on it. So anything I'm saying that's wrong, fair enough. Haul me over the coals, tell me off, call me Susie. Um, I didn't do it deliberately. I'm just seeing what I saw and commenting accordingly. But it's pretty clear that there's going to be 10 levels of spells, which I kind of thinking about it kind of makes a little bit of sense, because the way spellcasters kind of work, that would kind of probably mean that you'd have first level and second level spell, probably first and second level spells, maybe within the first couple of levels of play, which is quite interesting. Then every other even level, probably the way it would work, assuming that they're going to use a kind of a 20 level build, which seems to be the norm now. That seems to be what the goal for high end play, 17 to 20, in that range. So to have the 20th level and 10th level spell seems to be quite a good goal, I think. So I get that. That makes sense. The goblin class does seem to be goblin race does seem to be synonymous with what Paizo stands for, and obviously it was in Rise of the Rune Lords, and it kind of makes sense to make it a playable race, and to be honest, could be a lot of fun, and I don't think that's a bad change at all. I mean, you could still do it in any version of the game if you really wanted to, and with a capable GM, but nice to see they're marrying it closer to their own company image, which is a good thing. I think that's solid. I like the idea there. It's quite solid. Um, what else was there? I've looked at how the combat seems to flow, because there's going to be sort of three actions that you're able to use, and depending on what you do within those actions has certain impacts upon the kind of things you can do. So, for example, if you put your shields up, obviously you get a bonus because you've got your shields in play, and then you can have a sort of sword and board fighter who still has two other actions. If he's toe to toe with somebody, he could theoretically attack twice. And in theory, because you have three actions, it looks like you can attack three times. Now, I don't know if I've read that right or seen that right at this stage. I don't know, but that's kind of the impression I got, and it seemed as if the first attack was the normal base attack. The second attack was at -5, and the third attack was at -10. So that's the impression that it gave to me at this point. Um, Not sure really realistically how good that is, because one thing I've noticed from play of 5th edition was that when we talk about the disadvantage and advantage mechanic, and advantage and disadvantage effectively, sorry, for those that may or may not know, probably most people will know, is obviously an advantage you roll 2d20 take the best one, disadvantage you roll 2d20 take the worst. Now, I think the likelihood, unless you've got incredibly high bonuses, the likelihood is that you're going to, if it's a disadvantage, you're going to miss. If it's an advantage, you're going to succeed. Now, why is this important? Because in essence, if you've got, two um, two two swings of the sword, for argument's sake, the likelihood is the same. Now, I noticed that they're doing a thing now where a natural 20 is a critical, or 10 over the armor class. Well, let's just think about that for a minute. A 24, a 14 armor class requires a 24 at low levels, things like that. It kind of, it's interesting, but I'm not sure on that. I'd have to really see how the maths play out in reality. So these are interesting little nuances and changes, but I can't really comment too much further. But just giving you a sprinkling of what we've seen so far. Now we're about 10 minutes in. Now I don't think I've received any questions at this point. Yeah, no live chat questions. If you do have any, please throw them into the mix on this little video. I'd be happy to try and respond as best I can. It is still early days. and I don't have very much details, but I'm just curious. My my vision, my hopes for Pathfinder Second Edition would be that they do go more in the direction of Fifth Edition, or actually broke new ground entirely. I know that that's hard to do. My my fear for them as a company is that this is obviously in light of the fact that since 2000 and late 2014, well, at least 2015, let's be honest, and it done. Well, I don't know. I may be getting my facts wrong here, so I'm going to try and recall that. I think at least for the last 2 years, let's put it that way, um, Dungeons and Dragons has recovered its ground that it had lost due to some very bad decisions a few years ago. And Pathfinder's got to do something to try to recover that. Now, I admire them for going head to head, toe to toe with Dungeons and Dragons and almost stealing that crown. But the one thing I will never forgive Pathfinder for, to be honest with you, is that it went down the route of crunchiness. It took fantasy to the highest area it can go in terms of volume turned up. It's almost a superhero game in so many ways. There's so many crutches for players, in my view, and there's an audience for that, and that's great. But it pushes an agenda which has become more apparent as I played it for a longer length of time, and I stuck with it till the beginning of 2016, and then called it quits. In essence, was the end of my time with Pathfinder. I will not go back to it in terms of its core books. I never went beyond the core books or the splat books the core books, because I don't like splat books. I tend to find that they muddy the waters, and when you're dealing with a game that's got multiple layers, Pathfinder had with its synergies and everything else, things can quickly get broken and become very difficult. And sometimes small ripples in a game that is that deep are very difficult to see um, until you've played for many, many months. Anyway, so there was a lot for me. There was a lot of issues with the game once you went beyond the core book, and it became a bit of a bean countering exercise, which I really didn't like. So you've seen my previous videos, you know all about that. But now we're at where we are. We are where we are, and it's pretty clear that they're not going to be producing any more stuff for going beyond a certain point. I think the end of this year, the direction of the company is now switching into Pathfinder 2. That's basically pretty clear what's about to happen. Um, and that is going to be interesting, and it's going to be fascinating because I can kind of see that this is a battle between, can Pathfinder, Paizo, can they recover the crown that D&D now has? That's going to be interesting to see. I don't know what's going to happen over this. I have no idea if they ever will. I admire them for going for it. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's an amazing effort that they even got close to taking the crown away. But I understand why that happened. It was lightning in a bottle, and they made a huge mistake. Wizards of the Coast originally made a huge error, or Hasbro Games, but made a huge error with the release of Fourth Edition, alienating the key people. And that's the DMs, that's us, the Bible salesman, really. That's us people, because we love role playing games. We're the ones that go out and buy them. We're kind of complete, we like to complete our sets. So we're the kind of people who plug the money into it. Yeah, sure, the players have a player's handbook, but ultimately, that might be the only purchase they need to make in a system, whereas the DM is the one that's propping it all up and buying stuff. So it's really important that any system that launches really appeals to the referees. So far from the playtest, it looks a lot of fun. Quite impressed with what they've done. It looks interesting, and I look forward to seeing where it goes. This is going to become an interesting battle, because I think we're going to see a lot of flame wars and a lot of interesting. We're going to see some. We're going to see something very, very important for Paizo, which they've never done before. They took away the fan base of Dungeons and Dragons before, because where else were those fans going to go? They had nowhere to go. This time, when Dungeons and Dragons relaunched into fifth, it was kind of, for me, it was probably their final. It was the final throw of the dice for Dungeons and Dragons, as much as the name is synonymous with American culture and folklore, really, in many ways. Um, I think if Fifth hadn't have done as well as it's done because of the fact the direction they took, I'm not sure that we would have ever seen another license of Dungeons and Dragons. I think we would have seen a lot of clones, but I don't think we may have ever seen another license, because it wouldn't have been worth it. But Fifth has proved that it is, and it's a popular system, and it looks like they're going to take a slow approach to it, which is a fantastic thing. And I'm delighted about that. And if we do end up with two really cracking quality systems that have gone back, their look is more backward in terms of less crunch, more role playing, well, count me in. I'm interested. Yeah, but if they go down a route which it's all bean countering, I'm not going to do it because I've learned the harsh lesson. Bye bye.